Hi, this is Justin Colletti with Plugin Lines today. You may know me from Sonic Scoop, and today I'm here on the Plugin Lines channel with Mr. Eric Racy. You might have thought it was Eric Racy, but it's not. It's Eric Racy, and if you don't know his work, you absolutely should. He's worked on a tremendous amount of really big pop stuff, as well as hip-hop and R&B. He's worked with Katy Perry, Pharrell, Janelle Monáe, Kelly Clarkson, Nicki Minaj, J. Cole, Lil Wayne, Missy Elliott, Troye Sivan, and really too many to mention. But in addition to his work as a tremendous producer, engineer, mixer for some really high-profile pop artists and in other genres, he's also one half of the brain team behind Black Box Analog Designs. If you haven't heard of these guys, they came out with the Black Box Saturator as one of their first products, and really amazing tube saturator that's since been picked up by Plugin Lines and put into software form. Very recently, they are now coming out with the mid-side version of this processor. Why would you want to do saturation in mid-side, affecting sides differently than center? I want to get Eric's thoughts on this, his ideas about using saturation in general, and what makes the Black Box different and something you should check out for saturation. It is a super cool sounding plugin. It's probably one of the most recent, most popular ones in the Plugin Lines family. So super excited to have him on to give us insights about how to use saturation in our mixes, no matter what devices you use, and to get some insights into his tools as well. Eric, thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me, man. Good to see you. I'm great.
Right back at you, dude. So let's dive right into it. Before I ask you about Black Box,
Sure.
I just want to ask you about saturation more generally. You're a
Yeah.
mixer. You've been doing it for a long time, both in the analog days and now in the kind of digital analog hybrid days. Why is saturation important as part of your process? Why did you feel like you need to add a new dedicated saturation tool to the market? Like, how do you use saturation in your work?
You know, it's funny. That's the quest for finding that certain something that was missing is actually how the whole black box thing started. But, I was mixing, mid 2000s, I guess. And I was finding that I was running my mixes through a lot of gear, a lot of high-end analog gear, but I might be hitting a piece of gear that's maybe a compressor only for the tubes and transformers, but not actually using the compression, or running through an EQ, but really not actually using the EQ, just using it for its circuitry. And so what I was doing is really trying to get some of that saturation and harmonic distortion. And I kept thinking there's got to be a better way to do this, and a more direct way to do it. And I think a lot of people were doing that at the time, because what happened is, as we went from analog to digital, we started losing a lot of that natural saturation and harmonic distortion that you find in gear. So, back in the day, you'd hit a tape machine or a console or whatever gear you're hitting, and it sort of automatically adds some of that. And that's why, we loved certain pieces of gear for that character that it added. And so that's something that, as we got cleaner and cleaner and in the digital world, we started to lose some of that. So that was sort of what started this quest. And I think a lot of us realized that. And it started with the summing mixer craze, if you remember that was how everyone wanted to try to add that back.
Yep.
But I think we kind of all collectively realized that while digital's amazing, we did lose something along the way. And so that's sort of what set us, on that path. And the other thing is that saturation is really, really flexible. People think about it as being, just distortion. But in reality, saturation can do everything from give you some harmonic excitement to full on, distortion to dynamics control. So in my workflow, I end up using it, to cover a lot of bases, actually. And it's something that it's probably my most used tool. Right. And at the risk of giving a really long answer, the other thing about saturation that I love is that the way that it interacts with the material and what it does helps enhance the material on an emotional level. It helps us feel more connected to it. You run a guitar, a virtual guitar amp through it, and with the right saturation, you can suddenly make it feel real. It makes elements feel like they're in the room with you. You can push things and, just to the point of breakup, and make it feel as though, it's adding to the intensity and some of the sort of the drama or the tension. And so as a mixer, I think it's probably the tool that gives us the most direct ability to influence the emotional intensity of what we're working on. And for me, that's probably the most important thing in mixing. So for all those reasons, it's kind of my most used tool and something that I couldn't live without at this point.
Very cool. Yeah. And just like you say, saturation has become increasingly important as we've gotten into this digital domain. And now taking a beautiful analog color box like the Black Box and making it available in digital is very cool. And before we talk a little bit about it specifically, you said something about, there being a lot more flexibility in saturation than people realize. Can you give us some insights into that? I know that I think it has like a pentode mode and a triode mode, and there's different kind of colors you can get out of it. Can you give us a broad overview of the kind of colors that you think about when you think about saturation? Like, what are the different types of colors? How do you describe those that you could access through a tool like the Black Box?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of people, I think one of the first things they think of when they think about different types, I hear people talk a lot about even versus odd, order harmonics, but I think that to me, that's actually a lot less important than the type of saturation because most of these tools are adding complex harmonics. It's not just one or the other. So, you can get everything from, if you're focusing these harmonics on the top end, you can get some air, you can get some excitement on the top end. When you start pushing the lower end, you can start adding density, which of course brings up the tails, which brings up some of the room in, say, drums, things like that. So depending on how hard you push it and where you focus the energy, you can do everything from sculpt some of the frequency response to, like I said, dynamics control, and that's one of the things that I really wanted with the HG2 is because tubes round off transients in a really nice natural way. You can increase that the density by controlling your transients and peaks in a way that doesn't lose the impact in the punch, like when you're using a compressor that's got an attack and release, and you often hear those parameters, pumping and interacting. So those are some of the ways you can use it. And then of course you add MS in the ability to really target certain frequencies, and then it's a whole new world.
Right. Well, let's sort of get into that idea of using saturation in mid-side. So the original one had a couple of options as far as filters go. And it seems like what you're saying is in addition to, the even order versus odd order harmonics, a big thing is how you tilt the kind of frequency response of the saturator. Are you sending it a lot of lows, a lot of highs? And you had that built-in switch in the original HG2 that allowed you to kind of skew things towards the lows, skew things towards the highs, or keep it flat. For this one, with the mid-side one, it looks like you've added on a lot of filters, so you could make the saturation on the mid sound really different than the saturation on the sides. I believe now there's like a totally variable filter on it where you can, set the exact frequency point you want to cut lows or cut highs, or do like a band pass. Can you tell us a little bit first about some of the new filtering options in the HG-MS2, this mid-side one, and also how you'd use some of those features in kind of a mid-side way? In what ways do you think about treating the sides differently than mids? How do you go about that? And do you have any real-world examples for how you might use some of those features?
Sure, yeah. So when we set out to make this new version, originally we knew we wanted to do an MS version because that adds a whole new range of possibilities. But we've been using this for quite a few years now, and when doing this, I really wanted to add more than just the MS feature, and I wanted to be able to make this into something that could dig a lot deeper and was a lot more flexible. So, I think initially they thought we were going to do just an MS, and I kept going back with more features and more features, and the team was awesome. Christoph, went back and forth with us a million times through all these versions, and this programmer they have over there, Alexandra, was awesome. She really, every time we'd hit her back with a new request, she'd have it turned around really quickly. And so we ended up doing a lot of experimenting with different features. And what we ended up with is this new set of filters. So instead of, like you said, just tilting towards the high or the low, it gives you the ability to do everything from band pass, band reject, and low pass, high pass. And then you have Q control and slope for all of that. So what it lets you do is decide, let's say I want to saturate only the snare area in the mid, but I want to keep that area, clean on the sides. So that's an example. Or one of the things I've been doing recently is, maybe I have a vocal, and the vocal's got a resonance, as vocals often do, especially, in a modern pop mix where you're really compressing a vocal and you need it to be bright, but it's also pretty loud and pretty compressed, and a lot of times the sibilants and those resonant peaks that always come up can get really prominent, so you don't want to saturate them more. So what this lets you do is go in and choose to saturate, say, everything but those areas. And if you're working on, say, a vocal bus, you can decide that I want to take those out in the mid, but maybe you have a nice choir section that is, a lot of that is in the sides, and you can leave that in the sides, or you can saturate those differently. So those are some of the ways that you can now address the mid and the side differently in a way that really lets you dig into what you're working with. And also for mastering, where you don't have access to those tracks and you only have a 2-track to work with, the level of depth is really light years ahead of what the old plugin was in that respect.
Yeah, I think that's very cool. And for me, doing mastering most of the time, there's so many instances in which mid-side processing is so helpful for me. Like you said, maybe wanting to leave cymbals out of that saturation that are kind of hard pan and keeping those cleaner and saturating things down the middle. And I love this idea of now just doing band specific saturation, just targeting a vocal or, just targeting a snare drum. That kind of stuff is really interesting in mid-side. Now, going back to the more simple ways to use this for people who aren't mid-side freaks like you and me, what are some of your favorite places to use the traditional kind of mono instance of the Black Box in your mixes?
On this new one of the things that I really love is drum room mics. A lot of times I really want to crush that mic, but what happens is the cymbals get really resonant and they get really loud and swirly, and it gets kind of chaotic. So what I've been doing is I've been actually saturating everything but that range, and so I could really smash those room mics, but the cymbals themselves stay very, very close to what they were originally. So it gives me a level of control, even without going to MS, that I've never had with any other tool, and the ability to decide what gets processed, with that saturation has been incredibly useful for me.
Very cool, man.
One of the other places that I've been using the new MS version a lot is actually with pianos, and whether they are stereo, real pianos, or a lot of the virtual pianos that are created with samples, notoriously, they have phase issues. So they sound super wide and they sound great in stereo, but they just collapse in mono. And a lot of times that doesn't work with an arrangement that's really relying on that piano. So what I've been doing is using the HG-2MS to narrow that, but I can do that by frequency now, because I can decide what is in the sides and what is in the center in terms of saturation and density. So what I'll do is I'll sort of bring that in, but then I'll add some of the lost energy back, so the piano still sounds full and bright and as big and present as it needs to, but now it's a lot more mono compatible. So I can kind of find a nice happy medium with that and bring that piano into focus.
Very cool. Awesome. Hey, so we've talked a lot about saturation, a lot about this new plugin. I think the best thing for people to do is to try it out for themselves. And the best way you can do that is to go to plugin-alliance.com, where you can try out this or any of the other plugins in the Plugin Alliance family for 2 weeks totally for free. So go over there if you haven't already, plugin-alliance.com. Definitely check out the Black Box. It's becoming a favorite of a lot of major producers, engineers, mixers, and a lot of people who I really respect are using this tool quite a bit. Now, since you are in the Plugin Alliance family, I want to ask, are there any other favorite plugins you have from Plugin Alliance? I've got to ask because I have the mega bundle. There's like well more than 100 and 150 plugins or something like that in there. And I keep on trying to find excuses to use like each and every one. So what are some of your favorites out of that whole family of tools?
I use a lot of them. I think probably some of my top favorites are the Iron. And the Iron actually is another one of those tools that I don't use much compression on, often far less than a dB, half a dB. I mean, the needle barely moving, but the air bass button and some of the tonal features on it, the weight that imparts is incredible. In fact, it lives on my mix bus, I'd say 99% of the time. Another one is the Amic EQ. I have some presets that they had created for it when the plugin came out, and I actually end up using them all the time. And because, again, that does MS as well, that's another one where I use it in a similar way as the HG2, but of course without saturation. But again, one of my favorite EQs. And the other one is the VSC2, which is another one that lives on my mix bus most of the time. And again, barely touching, the compression. The needle's barely moving, but it really adds something, especially when it catches the snare or the kick. So those are probably my top three that are on everything.
Very cool. Yeah, great tools. And I get what you're saying about the SPL iron. There's a whole bunch of tools in the Plug and Alliance family of stuff where they have a sound as soon as you turn them on, just like real analog stuff does. And of course, the Black Box is another one of those great tools in that world. One last question I want to ask you about using the Black Box and using saturation before I let you go for the day is, how often are you using the Black Box just straight up on a track compared to using in parallel and to push it extra hard? Do you have thoughts about that, using it kind of straight away versus in parallel?
Well, so I'm actually using it because now, in the box with this, unlike the hardware, we have the wet dry mix. I use it straight all the time. So it's almost always on my mix bus. There's one on my vocal bus, one on my instrument bus, and then I have them on individual elements as well. So, I mean, it's all over things directly. I rarely use it as a return in parallel because, again, I have the wet dry on there.
Yeah, I guess what I meant was in parallel, meaning using that wet dry.
Got
Like
you.
how often are you using it 100% wet, and where do you often find yourself using that wet dry knob to get parallel-like effects?
I think I would say it's somewhere in the middle. When I'm using it on buses, I'm often using it in parallel. I'm using the wet dry to to back it off and find a nice balance between the processed and unprocessed. But then on other elements like on bass or on drum buses and things, I often use it fully wet, because what's cool about it is that it does have the ability to be really transparent, or it can be full on saturation. So with the other controls and using things like density, I'm able to run it 100% without having to back it off and without it being too heavy-handed.
All right, great. Thanks so much. If you want to see more from Eric, Eric is going to be doing a demonstration video on this Black Box right here on the Plug and Alliance channel. Thanks so much, Eric, for sharing your expertise on this stuff. Thanks for making this along with your collaborator, Robert Wainscott, over there at Black Box.
Yeah, thank you for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Great to have you on, Eric. If you guys don't know Eric, like I said, he's an amazing producer, engineer, mixer, and he's actually going to be giving us here on the Plug and Alliance channel a walkthrough of how to use this MS version of the Black Box. So definitely check that out here on this channel if you want to see some real live sound examples of this thing in action. If people want to find out more about you, what are some of the best places to do that?
Sure, ericracy.com. And then from there I have links to my social media and Instagram and all that kind of stuff.
Good stuff. Thanks again for taking the time. This has been Justin Colletti of Sonic Scoop, this time with Plug and Alliance, with Eric Racy, one half of the main team over there at Black Box Analog Designs. You can get both their regular version of the Black Box and the new MS version of the Black Box over at plugand-alliance.com. Thanks for hanging out with us. See you next time.